let me give you a little bit of a tour of the solution here. If you look on the right, you see I actually have 4 projects in here. This one at the bottom is actually just a web service. So this is the web service that has my expense reports in it. This is the thing that would normally be running on, excuse me, that would normally be running on a server somewhere in your enterprise. I'm actually running it locally here just for the sake of this demo to make things easier. The next 2 projects up from it are actually just 2 data model projects. Right? So if you're a developer, you actually probably recognize one of them, they're actually symmetrical. One of them is meant to run on the client, and the other one is meant to run on the server, and that's basically the proxy through which that data is going to travel. If you're a developer, you'll probably actually notice this pattern here is actually sort of a best practice and a classic way that you'll set up an app like this. So already it looks familiar, and what you know applies, what you already know applies. The project at the top here is actually the one that I want to spend the most time in, and that's the app itself. So let's expand this out. And you can see how it's organized here. Again, developers, you'll probably notice that actually the design pattern used in this app is actually just classic MVVM. So we've separated the view code from the view model code, which is the data handling and the data manipulation code, from the data itself. So it's a very clean layout, and again, sort of a familiar pattern that you'll be able to use to build Windows 8 apps. We can go look here in the views section. You can see I have 2 views in this app. So there's a main page, which is going to list my expense reports. And then there's a details page that I'm going to get to by selecting things in my main page and clicking on them or tapping on them. Let's go look at. Let's load the designer here. Here's basically the main page, the layout of it. I'm in the XAML design view here, and you can see it's basically set up to have a grid. With at the top there's the title and there's a button, and at the bottom is basically the body of the body of that view. We can go look at the XAML itself, and you'll see what it's doing here. I won't walk you through every line, but basically we set up that grid right here. You can see here that we're actually setting up some data binding. And if I scroll down here to the body, you can see there's this grid view object, which is basically going to be this list of lists that is the body of that page. And you can see how we actually hook it up to the data binding stuff that we set up earlier. So right now, I'm going to run this app. I haven't connected it to the service or anything like that. And you will see, and sure enough, the app runs, but it doesn't show me anything. But this is, this will look familiar. This is the view that I showed you a second ago. Let's go back to Visual Studio now, and let's actually go connect things up. So the way we're going to do that, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to do something that will look familiar to all of you again, is we're going to just add a service reference. We're going to look for local services here that I can connect to. So we'll do this one, and we'll just call it services, and we'll add that reference. So now what I've done is I've actually connected up to that web service that I've got running on the machine. Now let's go look at the code behind that main page. You can see here, there's very little code. There's 2 event handlers that are interesting here. There's this unnavigated to event handler, and this is the one that actually is going to get called when the page loads. And then there's the event handler for when I click on one of the items in that grid view. And you can see here, actually, just 2 lines of code. The first one, basically what it does, it's actually going to load the data from the web service. And the second one just actually binds it to that view grid object. The thing I do want to point out really quickly here is, I don't know if you noticed this await keyword. So this is actually kind of a cool thing. We've added support to the language and to the platform for these inline async calls. So if you think of how you write, how you write asynchronous code today, the thing you have to do is you'll make your call to an async routine, and then you have to set it up so that there's essentially an event handler that gets called later on or somewhere further down in your code when that async routine finishes. You end up with all this incredible spaghetti code, especially if you're chaining a bunch of service calls, because you jump around in the code all over the place. It makes it really, really hard to read. So these await statements in this model that we have here lets you write just procedural async code, which is a really, really neat thing and a really great way to deal with stuff like that. Let's go look, yes. Here's actually my routine. Right now I have basically everything commented out, but let's actually put that back in. I've got 15 lines of code here, and all they really do is, here, we'll get rid of the comment here. And all this really does is basically connects to the web service. It'll actually, here's another async call to actually get the expense, so it'll actually load those expense reports in. And what it does down here is it basically iterates through it and uses a little bit of Lambda expression magic here to actually split things out into groups that are based on the status field in the expense report. and then it basically builds up the data that gets bound to that grid view object. So let's run it again. And now you can see that we're going to load the data. And so here are my expense reports. You can see how beautiful that is. And this is all just about defining the right templates in XAML and actually binding the right data. There's almost no code that I had to write to actually make this work this way. It works with touch just the same way, just the way you would expect it to. I can tap on one of these expense reports. I can drill into it. You can see this really rich view of the details of the expense report. There's this pie chart on the side, which is kind of neat because that's actually a third-party control from Telerik. Telerik, you probably know those guys. They're actually, I know they have a booth here at TechEd. They build all these great custom control libraries for the various Windows platforms or the various Microsoft platforms. So that's a really neat example of using using a third-party control.